December 16, 1944, dawned beneath a dense wall of freezing mist that concealed a final desperate gamble by Adolf Hitler. The German army, bloodied yet unbroken, launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, a colossal counteroffensive through Belgium's snow-laden Ardennes forest. Their plan intended to divide Allied lines, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on the Western Front. Nearly 200,000 German troops, supported by 1,000 tanks and assault guns, hurled themselves against unsuspecting American positions. Many frontline troops were young replacements, while others were veteran survivors of the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht counted on stealth, surprise, and bitter weather to mask their movement and slow Allied response. Radios buzzed with disbelief as reports described armored columns emerging from the woods like specters from a frozen nightmare. General Eisenhower's headquarters, initially assuming a localized thrust, soon grasped the scale of the assault. Panic spread through scattered American positions as the German advance shattered divisions and overran supply depots. This was Hitler's last gamble for victory in the West, forged from desperation and audacity. Elite SS panzer divisions drove relentlessly toward the Meuse River, hoping to reach Antwerp within days. Yet behind the lines, a quiet revolution in American firepower prepared to meet them. Unbeknownst to the Germans, Allied artillery had just been armed with a weapon of unprecedented lethality. This breakthrough involved a fusion of radar, miniaturization, and explosive engineering delivered in absolute secrecy. That hidden technological edge would soon matter more than tactical experience or sheer courage. The Battle of the Bulge began as a test of endurance, but swiftly became a contest of innovation. Snowy hills transformed into killing fields, where history's most advanced shells awaited their first combat trial. The American command braced for a battle fought with both ingenuity and grit. Despite being caught unaware, Allied troops possessed a trump card that would soon decimate massed formations. In the coming days, the Ardennes would witness war's most decisive meeting of flesh against machine. What emerged from that crucible forever altered the calculus of modern artillery and battlefield survival. And so, as columns of German infantry pushed forward under cover of winter, destiny approached overhead. Even before the first German artillery opened fire in the Ardennes, a classified miracle of American engineering was already in motion. Proximity fuses, cylindrical devices no larger than a light bulb, held inside them the power to transform traditional artillery into a sky-borne scythe. These fuses, activated by miniature radar sets, could detect their distance from the ground or a target and detonate shells mid-air with terrifying precision. Approved in the strictest secrecy by President Roosevelt, the technology had previously been reserved for naval anti-air operations, where it had shattered waves of Japanese aircraft. But now, in a stunning stroke of battlefield autonomy, Colonel Oscar Axelson had authorized their deployment for field artillery use, without waiting for higher approval from Washington. Over 200,000 shells with this new fuse were rushed to the front, hidden from German reconnaissance and even many American officers. These devices detonated 30 to 50 feet above enemy troops, creating rainstorms of white-hot shrapnel across massive areas. Where conventional shells relied on impact or timed bursts, proximity fuses ensured optimal detonation height, often multiplying killing power by 50 times. That meant German formations, tightly bunched for warmth and support in the winter cold, were suddenly exposed to a weapon designed to exploit concentration. The Ardennes would be its first true ground test. And as the Wehrmacht's most ambitious assault shadowed the silent forests of Belgium, America's deadliest artillery innovation quietly arrived, primed to change the shape of the battlefield, and perhaps the course of the war itself. Colonel Oscar Axelson was not a man known for recklessness. Yet in the bitter winter of December 1944, facing the largest German offensive on the Western Front, he made a decision that would risk court-martial but save thousands of American lives. Despite explicit high command directives to limit the use of proximity fuses to naval theaters, Axelson ordered ground deployment of the classified shells, without authorization from Washington. The stakes could not have been higher. Hitler's forces had achieved total surprise, smashing through thinly held American lines and forcing mass retreats. Entire towns and supply routes fell under threat. Infantry units, already short on ammunition and armor, fought from frozen foxholes against tanks, machine guns, and artillery barrages. Axelson knew that the difference between holding and collapse was measured in hours, and artillery effectiveness. So he gave the order: use the proximity shells. Not tomorrow. Now. Axelson's gamble was revolutionary in military terms. A single proximity-fused shell was now worth 50 conventional rounds. It put the power of a full battalion's fire into a single battery. When the first shells burst mid-air, showering German columns with lethal shrapnel from above, breaking what little cover they had beneath tree lines, frontline commanders suddenly felt the battlefield shift. What Axelson did was more than disobedience. It was leadership under pressure, rooted in an understanding that technology, when held back by fear of secrecy leaks, could no longer serve the soldiers who bled for time. His gamble bore fruit. Proximity fuses became the silent hero of the Battle of the Bulge, and Axelson became the man who broke the rules and helped save the front. At the heart of the proximity fuse was a marvel of wartime engineering, an electronic shell that could detect its own distance from the target. Instead of detonating on impact like conventional artillery, this new device carried a tiny, ruggedized radar sensor built inside its nose. As the shell arced through the air, it sent out invisible radio waves. When those waves bounced back off nearby objects, such as soldiers, vehicles, or tree canopies, they triggered detonation at the ideal height for maximum lethality, roughly 30 to 50 feet above the ground. Inside each fuse was a vacuum tube smaller than a cigarette, capable of surviving gun launch forces exceeding 20,000 times the force of gravity. That single tube, alongside a tiny battery, antenna, and circuit board, formed the beating heart of the system. The challenge had been not just inventing it, but mass-producing it. Over 100 American companies, including giants like RCA and General Electric, were secretly enlisted to fabricate more than 40,000 fuses a day, each one requiring precise engineering under impossible deadlines. The breakthrough fused artillery and radio science into one devastating package. The shell didn't need a direct hit. It created airborne shrapnel storms, shredding entire platoons at once. In the woods of the Ardennes, where tree bursts often wounded more than killed, air bursts over open ground were a nightmare come true for German formations. Foot soldiers had no warning, no time to dive for cover, and no hope that range miscalculations or bad angles might save them. The fuse effectively transformed every American artilleryman into a surgeon of destruction, capable of placing explosions not just where the enemy stood, but precisely above their heads, in mid-stride, mid-attack, in open fields, or behind log walls. It was modern warfare reborn through the invisible humming signal of a handheld radar. The first large-scale baptism of fire for proximity-fused shells came not in a laboratory, but on a snow-covered battlefield now seared into military history. On December 16, 1944, as Hitler's winter offensive roared through the fog-laden forests of the Ardennes, thousands of German infantrymen surged forward in tightly packed formations. These were armored infantry, Volksgrenadiers, and elite SS troops, accustomed to breaking American lines through sheer momentum and surprise. What they didn't know was that American artillerymen had just loaded a new kind of shell that needed no direct hit to kill. At dawn, near the Belgian village of Wehrmacht, Colonel Oscar Axelson's 2nd Battalion, 12th Field Artillery Regiment, fired their first salvos. Instead of the typical craters and delayed screams of wounded men, there came an eerie and instant silence, followed by the muffled collapse of entire attack columns. The shells had detonated mid-air, showering steel fragments across the frozen landscape, felling dozens at a time, ripping apart tightly grouped squads with horrifying efficiency. Up the line, at the Elsenborn Ridge, the 2nd Infantry Division experienced similar results. German soldiers advancing in waves suddenly dropped as if an invisible scythe had cut through their ranks. Survivors later described the explosions as coming from the sky, raining down death before they realized they were even being shelled. Without time to disperse or dig in, exposed German battalions lost entire companies in seconds. By nightfall, American batteries across the sector had fired over 10,000 proximity-fused shells. Reports from the front confirmed the fuse's promise. The lethality was so overwhelming that battlefield commanders began requesting it by name, ignoring restrictions and prioritizing its deployment wherever enemy concentrations threatened the line. It was a turning point. The German blitzkrieg had relied on shock and speed, but the terrible precision of America's radar-tipped shells shattered that advantage. The Wehrmacht had walked into the future without knowing it, and where their boots fell, the sky tore them open. By late December 1944, the city of Bastogne had become the symbolic heart of the Battle of the Bulge, a beleaguered fortress held by the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division. Completely surrounded by German forces, cut off from supplies and outnumbered 5-1, the defenders faced relentless artillery, infantry, and armored assaults. Yet amid freezing conditions and dwindling ammunition, the tide of the battle would turn not from reinforcements, but from the sky, through the destructive power of American proximity-fused artillery. On December 23rd, the weather cleared just long enough for C-47s to drop supplies. But the real salvation came from the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion. Armed with the newly authorized VT fuses, their 75mm pack howitzers sent shells exploding mid-air above German attackers closing in from the east. Waves of Panzer Grenadiers advancing through the wooded slopes near Marvy were shredded before reaching American foxholes. The cold air magnified the blast pressure, killing, wounding, or scattering entire units in seconds. Witnesses recalled watching German forces dive for cover, only to find that hiding beneath trees or trenches offered little protection from an airburst raining steel fragments at thousands of feet per second. The artillerymen of the 463rd, many firing from improvised positions inside the besieged pocket, registered their coordinates with near-zero error, guided by forward observers under fire. Every round that detonated overhead carved thousands of razor-edged splinters across a lethal radius, amplifying each shell and killing power 50-fold compared to ground bursts. The proximity fuses not only shattered German morale, they bought time. By December 26th, elements of Patton's Third Army finally broke through and relieved the city. In his journal, a German officer noted that the barrage never missed and that units vanished under invisible explosions. Bastogne did not fall. It bled steel and light in the cold air, and the defenders held, not just by grit and defiance, but by the invisible radar pulses inside a billion-dollar American secret. On January 18, 1945, near the banks of the Sauer River, General George S. Patton witnessed firsthand the true power of the proximity fuse, an event later etched into the annals of modern military history. Standing beside Colonel Oscar Axelson, the man who had risked court-martial to deploy the fuses without authorization, Patton watched as German infantry attempted to cross the frozen river in dense formations. They were unaware that they were stepping into the crosshairs of the 94th Infantry Division S artillery units, armed with the new VT fuse shells. Axelson gave the order. A coordinated barrage of 150 mm artillery thundered across the hills. But these were no ordinary shells. Their onboard radar would detonate them 30 to 50 feet above the ice, creating a lethal snowstorm of razor-edged steel fragments. What followed was a scene of surgical devastation. Patton later described it in his journal. Shells burst directly above their heads, cutting men down like wheat. His intelligence officer estimated that in less than a minute, over 700 German soldiers lay dead or dying across the ice. A single salvo breaking not just a river crossing, but the backbone of an entire regiment. The moment was a brutal reminder of how fully American artillery now dominated the battlefield. No longer just a tool of barrage and suppression, it had become a precision instrument of annihilation. Patton, a lifelong believer in armor and mobility, was visibly shaken by the sight, remarking later that, if the Germans had this weapon in '44, the war might have ended differently. It was a testimony to American science, industry, and cold calculation, weaponizing radio waves to turn entire battalions into stillness. The Battle of the Bulge was no longer just a clash of tanks and infantry. It had become a crucible for the future of warfare itself. As the Ardennes offensive unraveled under the crushing weight of American firepower, German survivors stumbled back from the front lines in a state of disbelief. Across foxholes, trench lines, and shattered forests, one question echoed through frozen lips. Was ist das für eine Waffe? What kind of weapon is this? Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS veterans alike had faced artillery before, but never like this. The shells were not seen, not heard, and, worst of all, did not land. They exploded above them, invisible death raining from the sky with no warning, no crater, no hope of cover. Veterans from Kampfgruppe Piper spoke of the horror of air mines that shredded entire companies in seconds. A corporal from the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division later recalled, "The shells did not fall, they simply appeared, blowing men apart around me. Their beloved Feldgrau tunics offered no protection as steel fragments, dispersed in perfect circles, ripped through formations that believed they were safely dug in." German artillery crews, trained to detect and counter enemy fire, were helpless. Their charts, rangefinders, and spotting techniques were useless. The American VT fuse had rewritten the rules of survival. The once proud German infantry, veterans of Poland, France, and Russia, were being undone by something they could not see, could not predict, and could not answer. Even the most hardened officers struggled to explain it. Major Rudolf Baer, an artillery observer, wrote in his journal, "The Americans no longer need to hit the ground. They strike the air itself." The Luftwaffe, grounded and powerless, could offer no reconnaissance, no interruption. Rumors spread of sorcery, of radar shells, of a technological abyss between the Allies and the Reich. By late December, German command began documenting unparalleled casualty rates tied directly to airburst detonations. General Hasso von Manteuffel bitterly complained that "our brave infantry is slaughtered by shells that explode in the air, beyond our defenses." For the first time in the war, German morale was not only shaken, it was gutted. Proximity fuses had become a phantom terror in the sky, a weapon that turned every open field, every wooded slope, every trench into a killing zone. And in the Ardennes, it broke the myth of German tactical superiority forever. When news of the proximity fuse's success reached Supreme Allied headquarters, General Dwight D. Eisenhower understood immediately that history had turned a corner. In the days following the Battle of the Bulge, he privately remarked to his senior staff that if Germany had possessed this technology first, the Allied invasion of Europe might have been impossible. Eisenhower, a man not given to exaggeration, declared it one of the most important developments in warfare since gunpowder. The VT, variable time fuse, had proven not only decisive in the Ardennes, but transformative in the broader war effort. Unlike atomic research, which was still shielded in secrecy, the fuse was already reshaping the battlefield in real time. Eisenhower knew its worth. It multiplied lethality, conserved ammunition, and shattered enemy formations that had long defied conventional shelling. It was war by mathematics, electricity, and engineering, an alliance of science and steel no army could resist. Even before the Ardennes outcome was sealed, Eisenhower demanded an acceleration of production and deployment of the fuse across all theaters. His urgency was not merely tactical, it was born of a deep realization. Whoever controlled this technology controlled the future of war. It could decide the fate of airborne assaults, naval battles, and the lives of infantry who now fought in skies laced with invisible death. American intelligence soon confirmed that the Germans were desperately trying to replicate the device. But the Allies had a critical head start. 15 million fuses produced, thousands tested in naval combat, hundreds of scientists and companies sworn to secrecy and precision. The industrial might of the United States had once again forged a miracle at scale. Eisenhower's foresight set the tone for post-war military doctrine. The proximity fuse was no longer a battlefield advantage, it was a strategic cornerstone. Plans for Korea, NATO defense, and Cold War arsenals locked the principle into play. Detonate at calculated distance, maximize lethality, deny the enemy any ground to feel safe. But the weapon's true legacy was philosophical. It proved that brilliance in laboratories could reshape destiny just as surely as bravery on battlefields. And Eisenhower, understanding the stakes, immortalized the fuse not in monuments or medals, but in a warning, one that echoed through the corridors of power. Technology will rule the next war, not courage alone. The proximity fuse was more than a weapon. It was a billion-dollar leap into the future of warfare. Built in sealed labs and assembly lines disguised under peacetime industries, it was a triumph of American scientific unity. Over 100 companies from Radio Corporation of America to General Electric worked in total secrecy to mass-produce 40,000 precision fuses every single day, a technological pyramid built on miniaturized vacuum tubes capable of surviving 20,000 times the force of gravity. This was not merely an invention, it was logistics married to genius, a marriage no Axis nation could copy in time. When the war ended, the fuse remained intact, not just in armories but in doctrine. It became the gold standard of artillery, naval, and anti-air systems, saving American lives in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. In the nuclear age, the same principle guided missile defense, air-burst artillery, and space-based detection systems. It proved that winning modern war required not just courage or numbers, but superior intellect and unmatched industrial power. The greatest secret of the fuse was not the device itself, but its lesson, that the battlefield rewards innovation as much as valor. By turning physics into force and circuitry into survival, the proximity fuse closed the era where bravery alone could win a campaign. Its legacy rewired military thinking, embedding the principle that the next war will be won not on the front lines, but in the laboratories, universities, and hidden workshops where tomorrow's weapons are born. As historians and generals looked back, they recognized what Eisenhower understood instantly, that the proximity fuse was a quiet revolution, a tiny brain inside a bullet that altered destiny. 3 inches of steel and glass, packed with invisible energy, showed the world that the future of battle belonged to those who could imagine what others believed impossible. The Battle of the Bulge was the proving ground, but modern war was the inheritance. And it was shaped forever by a billion-dollar secret that shattered armies, bent history, and left the world permanently changed by the power of an idea detonated at just the right height.